Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Michael Good. I'm an associate professor of history in the Department of History and Political Science. I'm also an executive committee member in Peace and Justice Studies. And I'm pleased to welcome our next panelist, Ray Ritchie. And just a few announcements. First off, I want to make sure we acknowledge and thank our partners in organizing this event. And that includes the Center for Constitutional Studies and the Center for the Study of Ethics. Thank you to both organizations for partnering with us in Peace and Justice Studies for this wonderful event. This panel will run from 1 to 2:15. If you have time and are interested, we have a panel following this one. We have actually 2 more panels. From 2:30 to 3:45, Dr. Brian Waite, who is a professor of secondary education at UVU and the director of the Global Intercultural Programming at UVU, will be giving a talk on multicultural education, how to implement equity and culturally relevant practices. And then our concluding panel from 4 to 5:30 p.m. is our colleague in the Center for Constitutional Studies, Alicia Tucker, who is the Constitutional Literacy Fellow at the Center. And she will be discussing, or she will be presenting on conflict resolution among the founding fathers, or among the founders. So if we certainly invite you if you're interested in these panels, to please consider joining if you can. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome my dear friend and colleague in peace building, Ray Ritchie. Ray Ritchie is a dispute resolution specialist working in the upper Midwest. She's also a fellow Chicagoan, like me. Ray is the founder of Caldera Dialogue and Consulting Services, where she supports the development of conflict management programs, change management, dispute system design, and community dialogue. Ray teaches mediation, arbitration, and negotiation. She was the programs director at the Center for Conflict Resolution in Chicago for over a decade. Ray is a certified mediator of civil, criminal, elder, and family disputes, and a certified mediation trainer, and she is a really wonderful mediator. She facilitates community forums and has organized nonprofits and LLCs through consensus building. So Ray brings to the panel today a lot of experience. And so without further ado, please welcome Ray Ritchie.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. When you have the privilege in your career to fly on a plane for hours and speak, you'll wonder, will anyone come? Will anyone care? And it turns out, get your colleagues to make it a requirement and bring pizza, and a bunch of people will show up to your party, which feels great. No, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited, actually, to talk to you about this very specific and broad, at the same time, idea of the impact of identity inside of healing conversations. So I'm going to flag for you a little plan for what I want us to review together today. So I want to talk about interest-based bargaining and community mediation. It's the foundation to my professional experience and education, and it really frames the vision for what I want to talk about, where it relates to identities and values. And then I want to talk about how those identities show up when we're inside the conversation, so when we're part of that dialogue. And then also if we've got sort of an impartial facilitator, mediator, supportive role, how identities impact all of that work. Michael already did this part, but I am associated with, I have my own design and consulting firm, and I get to travel all over the country and help people think about how they want to manage and resolve conflict, which is really joyful for me. I am still a volunteer at the Community Mediation Center that I used to work at. So I still mediate cases in the city of Chicago. And then I teach at Loyola University in Chicago, which is where I got my JD. So my path to moving into peace building was an unorthodox one. I played roller derby, which is, a natural first step. Then I went to law school, like everyone who plays roller derby. And then I started doing community mediation. And so those things are all still really integral both to who I am and to how I show up inside of the work. So what do we mean by a healing conversation? I have been privileged to be invited back. So I think it's been going okay year over year for these healing conversation workshops. But the first year when I got the invitation, I was like, absolutely. I've never been to Utah. Put me on a plane. And I got on the plane and I was like, what are we doing? What's a healing conversation? And I think that and every year I've come and I've had this slide in my Wednesday workshop because I think it's really important to think about, what do we even mean by this? And at first I thought, does UVU have a thing they call the healing conversation? And you don't worry, you don't, I don't know about it, you don't know about it either. But what do we even mean by this? And after years of sort of engaging in this particular language and listening to my really amazing colleagues talk about it, I think we mean a lot of different things. I think we mean anytime we're getting together and going to hard places and trying to do really important work. If you were here earlier today, you got to hear Carl Stouffer and Sarah Cook talk about what I think is obviously healing conversations, right? These international post-war community rebuilding, just really inspirational work. And I remember the first year I was coming and I read their bios and I thought, oh, am I supposed to be with them? Because my work for so much of my career has been not only domestic, but really local. Community mediation is designed to have volunteers who live in communities support the people with conflicts inside the community they live in. And I will say the reason that I ended up there is because I went to law school and I wanted to do international conflict resolution. And my first semester, I was able to go to an event on international law. And there was a man there who was a very big deal at the International Criminal Court. And he said, I know you all want to do this job someday, but I need to tell you that I get about 5 applications a day from people who are, international law experts or have studied international law. He said, and I don't need them. What I need is for you to go get a decades of experience at the criminal court in Chicago and then come join me at the International Criminal Court, right? I really need you to build these skills where you are and then apply them on an international level. And I don't think that's the only approach, but I'm really susceptible to advice that's clear. And I went, okay, then that's what I'll do. And I spent a decade in community mediation. And a question that often comes up at these panels is, if I want to do peace building, if I want to do this kind of work, what's the path? And I've known plenty of amazing practitioners who graduated college and started acting, on an international scale, working in international peace building. But I will say that for me, the path of staying and working in community really allowed me to hone skills and understand my motivations as I sort of moved forward in my career. So when we talk about a healing conversation, I think we mean all of these things and more. I think we mean formal and intentional dialogue where we bring entire communities of people together and we have an outline and strategies and focus groups and all kinds of prep work. It might mean a mediation between as few as 2 people about an issue between them. Peace circles and other restorative practices are certainly healing conversations. Living room conversations, which is a really interesting model that I'm not an expert enough in to discuss, but if you're not familiar with it, give it a Google. The idea of bringing 4 to 6 people together in someone's home to have conversations. I think even your class discussions, my class discussions sometimes feel like healing conversations. And I think that I have had plenty of healing conversations in my life with people I loved over a cup of coffee, right? We can harm each other and require healing, even to the people that we love and know the best. I want to give you a little bit of a primer on the community mediation model that frames a lot of this work for me. So I worked in what's called a facilitative mediation model. There are multiple models of mediation. None of them are right. None of them are the best. Anyone who practices will tell you what they do is the best. But this is the one that I learned in. It's what we consider a pretty traditional facilitative community mediation model, where the mediator gives absolutely no advice, no opinion, and no assessment. That is the hardest part to learn, because it is very obvious to me what other people should do, right? If you're a clever problem solver and you want to be a mediator, the dream I had was that people were going to just like come to me, tell me what was happening, and in my infinite wisdom, right, I would bring them to the obvious conclusion and I would like guide them to the truth. And it turns out that that doesn't work very well. What works really well is creating an opportunity for people to have a focused and productive conversation about whatever's going on for them. And we know that people are much more likely to execute the terms of a plan they came up with on their own. My solution to your problem is no kind of solution. That is an act of humility. And I've been a mediator for 15 years, and I still have to learn it all the time, because sometimes it's so obvious to me what people should do, but what's obvious to me is not necessarily what's going to be right. In order to do that work, mediators primarily manage the conversation, and we do that by asking a lot of questions, by using active listening skills, and by summarizing what people are saying in new ways that can often help them engage with the content. The process typically involves both joint and private sessions. So we're helping people talk together, but we also might take breaks where we check in one-on-one. As always, there are chairs in the front for people who are looking for seats. So one of the things that I want us to be thinking about is how people show up inside of a healing conversation, or even for our framework when we're thinking about a negotiation. So people typically do not show up to a conversation thinking, I'm so excited to learn I was wrong and change my mind, right? We typically show up to hard conversations thinking, wait till you hear what I have to say to you. I am absolutely sure that I'm right. And as mediators, what we try to do is help people move away from those positions, I'm right, you're wrong, to uncover the interests and needs that are influencing that position. And so I'm going to talk about the idea of interest-based bargaining. In mediation practices, we often talk about the idea of expanding the pie, meaning that instead of cutting this pie in half and one person, everybody gets a piece of it, then instead what we can do is increase the universe of options by looking at what are the things that are motivating us and what are the things that are most important. So I'm going to give you a little more info about it and then give you an example. Positional bargaining is typically limited and specific. This is, I'm negotiating the price of a car. I do not care if the person selling me a car likes me, right? I don't care. This is a one-time deal. I want the best possible price I can get on a car. It's different when I argue with my sister because I'm going to have to deal with her for the rest of my life, right? I care how I show up in that conversation. Positional bargaining aims to resolve the dispute that's in front of it, to settle that specific thing. We're typically talking about the what is happening, what we're fighting about. And it's often very easy to express. Positional dialogues are adversarial in nature, and they really often look a lot to the past. Who did what should have happened. A lot of our legal systems function this way as well, especially traditional criminal justice in our civil courts. In interest-based bargaining, we want to look at other possible options. Is there more that can resolve this than money? Is there more that can resolve this than the thing that is being asked for? We're going to look beyond the dispute. What other influences are occurring here? We're talking about the why. Why is something important? Often, what's really important to us is unclear. If you came to me for a mediation and you were like, I'm fighting a lot with my roommate, and then I said to you, what's important to you about your roommate? You would say that they stop doing the thing I don't want them to do, right? It's really easy to stay at positions. When we want to unpack interest, which is well, I feel disrespected because he plays music all night long and I can't sleep. Well, now we're having a conversation about respect. That's a totally different conversation than than saying, you're a bad roommate, right? Harder to argue from there. It's a collaborative process typically when we're trying to work in interest-based, and we look to the future. So an example I want to give you is many years ago, I had an employee on a team of 5 who was always late. He had not always been late, but he recently began to be chronically late. Work started at 9, and he started showing up at 9:12. And they started showing up at 9:18 with a coffee, which is 2 different kinds of late, right? And work started at 9. And we had a team of people that would come into the office. And we had a rule. The first person in the office has to do this job so that we're ready to start the day. And the second person in the office has to do this other job. But he was always the 5th person in the office, so he was never having to do those jobs. And I was getting angrier and angrier about it. Now, this goes to one very interesting phenomenon about being inside conflict, which is you can be in one all by yourself. Because I was really mad at him, and he was not mad at me. He was getting coffees and rolling in at 9:18 with no consequence. And I kept thinking, there's got to be something going on. I'm sure it'll shake out. And it didn't. And so I kept getting angrier and angrier, and it went on for weeks. So I would like to open it up a little bit. We don't have to use the mic or anything, right? So what do you think my position is? I've got an employee, they're always late. What's my position? What do I want? What am I saying that I want? Yeah. You're all the way to interests, right? So yes, but a responsibility responsibility is an interest, right? That's a motive. I want them to be responsible. But I might not start there. But you're right. That's totally one of the deeper things.
You just want him to be on time and do what he's supposed to do.
Absolutely. Be on time. Just be on time. There's not a lot of places to go from there, right? I mean, he could say, no, I'm not going to be on time, which full disclosure is what he said. But that's right. He could just say no. And now I'm in an interesting place, right? Am I going to fire my amazing employee because he can't be on time, right? So what's helpful is to figure out what's actually important to me, right? So be responsible. Be a responsible member of the team. What else might be important to me? What might be other needs and interests that are happening for me? Yeah. Absolutely. Respecting the other team members. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else that might be important? Yeah. Yeah, there's like a big missing communication piece, I think, for me. Yeah, you said to be on the same page. For sure. Yeah, do you have another one? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Our relationship, big time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the back. Yeah, we're not about to start a system of everybody can come whenever they want. Yeah, that has consequences, right? We have to sort of set a standard. And I'm not a micromanaging boss. I did not want to have to talk to an adult about being on time for a job. That was not something I was interested in. Yeah, I think those are all great examples of interest. I got some of them. I didn't get all of them. I knew you'd get more than me. But, right, so the position, right, you're always late. Don't be late. Be on time. That's really hard to negotiate with. That's really hard to move from. That's hard for us to have a collaborative relationship if that's something that I'm interested in. But underneath it, right, respect for the colleagues, respect for me. And I like the idea of our relationship too. And not necessarily relationship, maybe a little bit relationship of like, I'm your boss, but also how we communicate or don't, right? This idea of being responsible. And then I think for me, there's this element of fairness a little bit, right? It seems unfair that he's gonna keep coming to work late. Now, so we've got this, right? We've got these positions and then these needs and interests. And I thought, well, we can have a conversation about all of those things. And we did, and I was still mad. I was still upset about it. And it turned out, I know you're so desperate to know. So what was happening is that he lived really far away. He took a train in from the suburbs of Chicago, and they had changed the train schedule. So his options were to come in at 8:10, far too early, or about 9:15. And so he had started coming in that little bit later and thought that it wouldn't be a problem. But I've got all those interests, right? The colleagues, the teamwork, the fairness, the responsibility. And I said, but it's not fair to everybody else on the team for you to miss the first quarter of an hour of work and they have to pick up all the slack. And then he said, but Ray, I haven't left before 5:30 in a month. So what I hadn't realized, because I was also leaving at 5, is that all the end of the day things, because of this train schedule swap, he was taking like a 5:50 train. So he was staying much later and doing all the end of the day work so that everybody else could just like pick up and leave at 5. So if I really cared about like fairness, he was actually working more than everybody else, right? He was like covering this other ground. He was respecting the team, right? But we're still missing some communication stuff. We talked about it and it felt resolved, but I honestly didn't feel better about it. And I realized upon later reflection that there was more than those needs and interests happening for me. And I think that's really true for a lot of people. This formula of help a person move from the position they've taken, get rid of your barking dog, to their interests underneath it. I work from home and I need it to be quiet and my neighbor's dog is barking. Quiet, that's much more accessible than telling your neighbor to get rid of their dog or move, right? I need it to be quiet. That's really the model. That's the idea. And I've had plenty of cases in my life where I did everything I was supposed to do. I put all the interests on the table and I said, let's make solutions from the interests. And the party was like, nope. And they were still completely disinterested in what was happening. And that's because sometimes people are motivated by something even deeper than the needs and interests that are showing up inside this conversation. And that's both their values and their identities. I'm going to talk specifically about identities moving forward, but I really mean who we are and what's important to us inside of those identities. So when we go back to my example of my late employee, right? I've got these identities of like being a good boss. Like I want to be really good at my job and I want to run a good team. And those things, it felt like, because we'd had this failure of communication, he hadn't reached out to me at first, he hadn't realized it was a problem, I felt like those things were threatened. And I really was still defending them. I was still holding on to that posture inside of the communication. There are a lot of different ways that I mean identity. And I think that sometimes we don't even realize that we have or hold an identity until it's under threat. I didn't really realize until this incident happened how important it was to me that I be seen as a good boss to the 5 people that worked for me. I didn't know that until I was worried they wouldn't think of me that way. I would not have put "she's a good boss" like on a list of things I wanted people to think about me at the time. But when it felt like there was a menace against it, it became really clear to me that it's what was motivating all the ways in which I was showing up. I think our identities can show up in a lot of different ways. This is an unfixed list of identities that might influence how we show up in spaces. But if you were to ask me to make a bullet list of myself for you, I would not answer these questions. This would not be the first things I thought to tell you about myself. I don't know that they're the most interesting things about myself. Some of them are, and some of them are not. That I am a daughter, I think is boring. but that I am a wife is an identity that I hold through the world, right? So I think that's it, right? Those are both familial identities. And, right? So some of them I consider and some of them I absolutely don't, not really. So I put up here, though, a few of my own identities that I think influence the way that I show up in the whole world and when the conversation's hard. I'm an attorney. That shapes a lot of how I move through the world. I know that some of you are probably considering law school. Great. Go if you want to. Don't go because someone's making you go. Those people are pretty miserable in law school. But if you want to go to law school, I loved law school, but it literally changed my brain, right? It literally changed how I think, and I went in my late 20s. So my brain was done growing. Everything should have been normal. But it was a really challenging academic experience. And I'm really proud of the fact that I'm an attorney. But when I say to people, I am an attorney, they think that I work in a courtroom or a corporate environment. And those things have never been my job. Right? So I have this identity of being an attorney, but it doesn't mean to people what it means to me. It's really challenging to express that. That when I say I'm an attorney, I mean, I worked really hard and I got a JD and I teach in a law school and I can read anything, any like weird pop-up terms, like I know what they're trying to say to us. And I can explain law and I have new critical thinking skills that I didn't have before. But when people say the things that people say about attorneys, those are never the things they're saying, right? That's not what anybody means when they think about an attorney. I'm a mediator. Many people who end up becoming mediators have legal backgrounds, but I don't think at all that it's a requirement to do it really well. I think that I know a lot of amazing mediators that have never had any legal education and aren't interested in it. And in fact, I think people who've had legal education actually have to overcome a lot of that teaching to get great at being a mediator. But I've had like 5 cases in the last 2 years. I don't really take cases at the rate that I used to. I've mediated hundreds of cases. I've spoken to parties and set up and supported tens of thousands of cases. I still really hold this identity, and I probably won't. I'll probably mediate 2 cases in 2025. I'm a Midwesterner, which is obvious because you can hear my voice, right? But more importantly for me is that I'm a Chicagoan, right? That's like, right? You can call me a Midwesterner, but that I have lived in Chicago for a very long time, that I worked in Chicago for a long time, I teach there. That's an identity that's far more important to me. That I'm a Midwesterner means the mountains look fake to me always. They're so amazing and unreal. And all the lakes are too small, right? Because I'm from Chicago, we're on Lake Michigan, looks like a sea, right? But I'm a Chicagoan, and I have this pride about being a Chicagoan when I have nothing to do with what Chicago is doing well, right? Which also means I have responsibilities for this identity when Chicago is doing something that I dislike, right? I have these identities. They're huge geographic identities. I rarely think of myself and think I'm an American. That is just, it's true. I am an American, but I think of myself in this like more focused geographic identity. And I don't know why that is. It just is. I mean, we could probably talk for a long time about why that is, but I don't start, earthling American, North American, right? I think of myself as a Midwesterner and more importantly, a Chicagoan. But my wife is from Wisconsin and lived in Chicago for like 7 years. We lived in Chicago. And while we were living in Chicago, we were in Rome. And someone asked us in a shop where we were from, which is a European being nice. And when, you just answer the biggest city or state or, a place that this person might know. And I said, we're from Chicago. And my wife said, well, I'm not. Like as if it mattered to this person she's not like she's a Wisconsin sports fan. I'm a Chicago sports fan. It was really important to her. She was like, and it's, one time I went to Seattle and I didn't understand that Seattle and Tacoma have a rivalry of some kind. And I went on a walking tour and the guy just kept making all these Tacoma jokes. And I was like, what's a Tacoma? Like, I didn't even realize it was another town. It's like some of that stuff is so about the places that we're from, right? We don't even realize it's an identity that we're carrying into our travel, into our work, into how we show up in spaces. I'm a really great friend. I'm really proud of that. I think that's an objective truth about me. And I can think of 4 people who would tell you that's not accurate, right? Like not to everybody, right? That doesn't, you outgrow some people, right? So that is true and not always, right? I'm a wife, like I said. I think that's interesting about me that I got married. I didn't plan to get married. I planned to get married. It wasn't like an accident, but I didn't think my whole life that I would get married. I was in my late 30s when I got married. It was sort of a great wonderful, surprising event for me that I got married and was able to get married. It was a very big deal for me. And while it's not interesting to me that I'm somebody's daughter, it is very interesting to me, and it is very true about me that I'm my father's daughter. My dad passed away in 2013. I have literally had an experience walking on a city street in Chicago where someone recognized that I was my father's daughter. He saw my face, saw my father in my face. My father talked about me so much, and he went, "Aren't you Junie's daughter?" And I was like, this is very weird, but also true, right? So like that is a big piece of my identity, and my dad isn't even on the earth anymore, and he hasn't been for over a decade. And I build an amazing grazing board. You should come to my parties. I've got all the cheeses, all the meats, all the fruits. I can do the thing with the salami where it looks like a rose. Like I make a great grazing board. We don't have a word for that on my previous list, right? For what part of my identity that is. But it's something I'm so proud of. And I didn't know it was an identity I had until one of my friends had the audacity to sign up for the grazing board on a party planning spreadsheet. And I was like, excuse me, I bring the grazing board, right? Talk about a really weird place to build a conflict. But literally with that friend, there was this sort of exchange. She was like, well, yeah, you brought it last year. And I was like, but it's like my thing. And this is someone I love and know, and we're in a hard conversation about cheese, which does happen in Wisconsin a lot. But right, we're in a hard conversation about cheese because she has undermined an identity I hold as the person that brings the grazing board, which is so silly and very real, right? It's such a real thing that can happen to us all the time. And an identity that I did not name for you, but I'm sure none of you have actually forgotten, is that I played roller derby, right? I said it real quick at the beginning. It is not a thing I think about every day. It's a huge framework to who I was, but I did it from 2006 to 2009. That was like 12 presidents ago, it feels like, right? Like, that was a long time ago, right? I played roller derby. That's not me, but my outfit was green, so I put it up there. But right, so I played roller derby, which doesn't shape my identity much anymore. But there was a time when it consumed my identity, and I only wore Kelly green because that was my team color. And so I had all these shirts, and they all had my derby handle on the back and my number, and it was like everywhere I went, people knew that not only did I play roller derby, but I played on the quad squad, right? Like I played, right, for this league on this team. And that was really important to my identity at the time. And it was part of my statement when I applied for law school. And then I went to law school and I didn't play roller derby and I didn't think about roller derby. But people who knew me from that, and even now, almost 20 years later, when they see me, that's how they identify me. That's the thing that they remember about me. And what I think is interesting about that and really influences the way that we show up in these conversations is that we have our identities that we hold really dear, but I don't think it's uncommon to outgrow them. I'm proud of this. This is like a super rad thing I did once. My right ACL got torn, so I remember all the time that I did this. But there are so many things I've done since 2009 that I'm much more proud of, that I think have done a greater job of shaping the wellness of the world. But I'll never be able to like leave this behind completely because it set up my career path, and it's a thing that really sticks with other people. It's an identity that I have that they hold for me. And it might mean a lot of different things to you, right? What roller derby is. If you've never heard of it before, you're thinking 1970s banked track. If you have a friend who plays roller derby, you're going, that's right, she does remind me of so-and-so, right? Like that, it happens multiple ways. So I want to talk about how this idea of identity and our values shows up when we're inside the conversation. So this is the idea of what's happening for the people who are the actual speakers. And I think that our identities, without us realizing it, are very often a quiet motivator to what is happening. So in that conversation with my employee, my identity of being a good boss is actually influencing everything about the conversation. How I wanted to show up in it, how candid I felt I could be, how vulnerable can I be with him and still maintain the place where I'm the boss and he works for me, right? Like what's the threat to that? And I think that's a spectrum of how you show up. And as bosses and as you have bosses, you will all choose different sort of places on that spectrum. But, that it was influencing everything about what was happening for me while we were talking, even where we sat, right? If you're a supervisor and you've got an office with a big old desk, you can bring someone in and put them across the desk from you. That's one way to have a conversation with somebody, and it reminds them that you're the boss. But good leadership practice tells us that a much better way to have a hard conversation where you have power is to either have a chair, like if this was my desk, to have a chair right here on the side of my desk, so we're in collaboration, to go to a completely different room, and whenever possible, to sit near each other, right? Or across each other as equals. So when I talk about a quiet motivator, my relationship to him as a supervisor, the type of supervisor I wanted to be, all of that was even in how I was thinking about what room do I want to be in? What time of day do I ask for this conversation? How do I make sure that he knows we're going to have a serious conversation without scaring him, right? How do you tell somebody you want to have a hard conversation without saying the worst sentence in the world, we need to talk? Right? I don't know about you, but you can't say that to me. Because if you were here earlier, Sarah was talking about stress responses. Mine are up, and I'm the one who just said it, right? I'm like, oh, we need to talk? Oh, no, right? How do you tell someone we need to talk without having them worry? And so if you've got this identity where you're the person with power in the dynamic in particular, it's influencing everything that's happening. We also have an instinct to defend our identities and to defend who we are, especially when they feel threatened. And when someone calls into questions our views, our positions, things that we are saying are important, which can often feel really obvious to us, we can get defensive very fast, even in a well-prepared argument, even when we've been really intentional about how we're going to show up in the space. It's really easy to bring a defensive posture and not at all a collaborative one to the conversation. And what's important to remember about that is that identity might not actually be under attack. And it's really hard to know that without being able to have the conversation that allows us to be vulnerable enough to say, I think that you're suggesting I'm not a good boss. My mother is my primary opponent in hard conversations my whole life. Our conflict style in 2025 is totally different from our 1996 conflict style, but we engage in hard conversations a lot. We have a lot of hard conversations. And I'm a hyper collaborative conversationalist. I would like to sit down and talk about everything that ever happened. And my mother is conflict avoidant and will leave the room. So when that happens, she wins, which leaves me double fueled up for next time, right? And sometimes one of the things that happens and can happen inside a conversation is if I want to talk about a thing that happened in the past, I have learned that one of the things my mother hears me saying is, you were a bad mother, right? It's really hard to hear criticism about a time where she was the person responsible and not also accidentally say you were bad at the responsibility that you had. And I know that. And I am an expert at this stuff. And I'm still figuring out how to have us do that really well, where I can have sort of the collaborative unpacking, get on the same page to adults conversations I need. And my mother's identity as a mother can be preserved and respected. Right? That's a hard balance. And sometimes we totally nail it and it's really beautiful. And sometimes it is bad. You don't get good at this and then you're just good at it. This isn't like learning to drive. This is a perishable skill, which I heard once in a Tom Cruise movie about being a sharpshooter, but it really stuck with me. The idea of something being a perishable skill. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Right? And even this one person on earth that I've been working on this dynamic with for decades, sometimes we're really great at it, sometimes it's fine, and sometimes it's bad. and I think that'll probably be true as long as we're both here. Naming the influence of the identities, though, can be really helpful. In that example with my mom, if I say, I am not criticizing your mothering, but I want to talk about this thing, I got like a 50-50 chance she'll hear me. And that's not about my mother, that's about all of us. It's really hard when we get a positive thing and a critical thing to actually retain the content of the positive thing. And so, sometimes we have to keep naming that influence over and over, right? And in the last presentation, for those of you that were here, Sarah was talking about all of our stress responses that show up for people who are experiencing trauma and experiencing stress. And in my experience, I start feeling those stressors when an identity of mine is threatened inside of a conversation. And I think you've all had an experience like this where later you were like, I don't know why I was so hard, right? Why was I so stuck? Why was I so angry? And it's because a piece of who we are is insulted or disrespected. Sometimes the way that this shows up in conversation is when we come to learn or see something about the identity of the other person. So this has happened for me in my life in having conversations with people I love about really important global issues, where it is important to me, and not just important to me, but obvious to me that because we share a lot of other values, we will share the same take on this particular incident. And then they're on a totally different side, right? And I think this shows up when you think, I thought I knew you, right? That idea of like, what? And I think we see that in politics. I think we see that in faith. I think we see that in lots of different ways that we show up. This happened to me once with a friend who I really, really respect and think of as an ethical person who purchased a very expensive item on the internet. Very expensive. It was like a couple $100. It's expensive. She purchased an expensive item on the internet from a guy who, shall we say, probably doesn't need the money and probably didn't notice because of his endless wealth, okay? So she bought this thing and it didn't show up. Well, it showed up and it wasn't, and then she got it, it said it was delivered and it was never there. And she was really mad. So she contacted the company and she said, you said this thing was here, but the picture has it on a totally different porch. That isn't my porch. You delivered it to the wrong place. I'm really mad. And they were like, we're so sorry. Do you want your money back or do you want another one? And she said, I'll just take my money back. 3 hours later, her neighbor brought it over. The thing she'd ordered that had been delivered to the wrong house on accident. And I was like, oh, cool. So you're going to like let him know. And she was like, no, I'm going to keep it. And I was like, oh, my beloved friend is a thief. You are a thief. You are thieving from really oppressive capitalism, but you're a thief, right? Like, you're stealing. And I struggled with it. And I realized after a while it was like shaping a little bit how I saw her. We were doing something else, and I thought, she's going to take one. Like, I thought like, oh, she's a thief now, right? I think, and she's not. Or if she is, she's not telling me about it anymore. And I struggled with like, do I need to sit down and have a big conversation with her about how she is a little bit of criminal? And I ended up deciding that I did it, right? That I've known her for over 20 years and the whole of who she is, and she kind of got away with something, and it's not a habit she's made. So let's not report her. But I felt it was interesting because I really had this thought of like, I thought I knew you, right? The inverse of how this shows up is when we make assumptions about the other person because we know them. And if you've got a sibling, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Adult siblings are my favorite people in the world to mediate because they are almost always, it's our first peer conflict dynamic. And for most of us, the last time we lived together, we were like teenagers. So good, not great at engaging in conflict, right? I have a younger sister. She's 4 years younger than me. And she is the only person in the room who will make me swear and throw my phone across the room to end a conversation. She is the only person in the whole world who hangs up on me ever. No one ever hangs up on me. That's so rude. My sister has hung up on me twice in the last 2 years that I can remember. And I will agree that one of those times I totally deserved it. We know each other, and we have this old conflict dynamic from when we were children, from when we were teenagers, right? Firstborn baby, like a sister pair, like that's its own dynamic. That I'm an older sister is an identity that I absolutely carry, right? Like, that my sister is the baby is an identity that she carries, right? And how we relate to one another, right? We will get in fights because we're making assumptions because we know how that other person is going to show up. One of the hardest things in the world for me was realizing that my sister was no longer a child and was a whole person. It was actually very funny. I think she was 30 when I sort of came around to the idea that she wasn't like my little sister. Because I'm like, I taught you to use a spoon. You know, like it's hard. We hold on to that a long time. I had a case once with a lot of adult siblings and their spouses. So there were like 12 or 14 people in the room, 2 facilitators. The father had passed away, and they were all trying to decide how to take care of mom, who was not a part of the conversation that was intentional. So all these adult siblings are having this conversation, and it's intense. They're like unpacking family secrets and their grief, and it's amazing. It's so beautiful. And then they get it all sort of narrowed down, and now we're trying to figure out who's going to manage the bank account. We got to put one person on the bank account with mom, and everyone except the oldest sister agrees it'll be the second oldest sister. She has the most time. She has the most financial experience. It makes the most sense. And the oldest sister is like digging her heels in. There's only a couple of years between these women. They're in their early 60s, I think, late 50s, early 60s. And finally, at some point, one of the mediators says, it seems like you're really resistant to your sister having this responsibility. Why? And the oldest sister says, because I know her heart, and she's a thief. And everyone's like, oh my gosh. And they're like, what do you mean she's a thief? And she said, she stole my lipstick. And the mediator was like, today? And the whole room, everybody else knows this story, right? And they're all like, oh, prom. She stole her lipstick for prom. This woman, as a teenager, had spent special money on special lipstick for special prom, and the day of prom, her younger sister stole her lipstick. That is a 40-year-old story about this woman. But her older sister, right, she's got this thing. She's like, I know you. I know the truth of you. Nobody knows you the way that I know you, right? I know that you're a thief and you can't be trusted, right? The mediators brought those 2 women into a private conversation. They were able to resolve it. That sister did. The second sister did end up managing the account for mom. But it's so interesting to think of how we identify someone else can influence for so long how they show up. And it might be an intimate identification like that. Like, I know my friend's a thief, but I still love her. Or it might be an identity like on that original slide I had, right? About race or religion or where some, cultural identity, right? Those might also very much influence how we experience the other party, the type of assumptions that we make inside the conversation, the way that we show up ourselves. I also want us to think about, just shift it a little bit and think about how our identities and values show up for us when we're the facilitator. And I'm really cautious here to not use the word neutral. I used to talk about being a professional neutral a lot. And the more I do really challenging conversations with large groups of people, I realize that it's actually impossible to be completely neutral. I've had the privilege to do quite a bit of work in the city of Chicago with community and police on police policy and police procedure. I am not neutral about police and policing. I have opinions about police and policing. I think everybody does. Whether those positions are critical or favorable, I don't really know anyone who's like, I don't care what cops do, right? Like, I think everybody, you have some type of a position. But what is true is that I believe, but I can be neutral as far as this conversation goes, right? And so instead, in my practice, I talk a lot more when I'm in that facilitating the conversation role about the responsibilities of being either impartial, I'm not on anybody's side, or omnipartial, I'm on everybody's side. Those are two distinct approaches, both of which work really well to help other people have a hard or a challenging or a healing conversation. But if we don't have a sense of our own identities and how they might influence either our role and the power we have as the facilitator of a conversation, or the way we might interpret what gets said, we have a hard time being really good at this type of work. So I am always inviting facilitators and mediators to interrogate questions of who am I? Who am I as it relates to this issue, to this conversation, to these people? Where am I from? And I have a globe up there, but I mean in all ways. And how does my lived experience influence the work that I'm going to do? And then also inside this type of this type of work that's so based on identity and where identity is going to be so important, how do we make sure that we make space for the identities and values of others, both inside this individual conversation and in the field, in the practice as practitioners? And so a few reflections and considerations I have towards that end is that when I'm deciding whether or not I'm going to help support a dialogue, I'm asking if I can maintain the impartiality that's required, right? Do I have an opinion about it, but I believe the people in the room are better suited to make a decision? Then I can absolutely support this conversation. But I naively once tried to mediate between my mother and my sister, and then we all didn't talk for a month, right? Like that was impossible. I'm not neutral about either one of them, right? And I'm not impartial about it either. How might my beliefs, thoughts, identities, or values impact this conversation? Is there anything about who I am and who I've been that means I should get someone else in the room who has a different experience that can balance this perspective? Is there anything that I should share with the parties? Am I being selected to do this work because of this identity or value that I have? Right? It cuts both ways. We're not just trying to screen ourselves out for work. We're identifying work for which we are particularly well suited. And do I have the skills to support the work? Healing conversations are hard and totally worth it. And I've been better for every one that I've ever been a part of in my life. And it's important to know when I can't manage it, right? I've definitely had opportunities where I looked at a case and went, this is out of my league, or I can't do this alone. Right? Recognizing that like my skills as a mediator, my identity as a mediator is not threatened by recognizing that maybe I'm not the best mediator for this circumstance. And then understanding whether there are people with other identities that might be able to take a project if I learn that I'm not particularly well suited. And making sure that in my whole professional career, I continue to expand my network so that I have a lot of resources, so that I have a lot of options. Right? If I got offered a case and the parties were like, we'd really like a man, I'm like, do I have to make sure I know men? I have to make sure I have men mediators in my network, right? I do, which is great, but I have to make sure that that's true. If someone's like, we really want the mediator to be to have been a cop, right? If we're doing police work and that's really important and both parties really want that in the room, I have never been a cop. I probably would have talked about it by now, right? Like I want to make sure that I've got that I've got people with different types of identities that are going to be able to help support the work for the people inside of it. And then I think we should constantly be asking ourselves, who should be doing the work of healing conversations? I think the answer is all of us, right? That I think we all bear some responsibility to this, but making sure that we don't pull the ladder up behind us as we become more and more engaged in this work. And one last note is that I believe that it's really important to extend all the values of care and support and trauma-informed practice and healing-centered engagement that we think about for other people who are involved in a healing conversation to a person who's responsible for maintaining that space as well. We've got to take care of ourselves, or we won't have the resources to do this really, really important work. And we risk losing intergenerational talent and experience if people are able to do this work for 5 years, they burn out, and then they're like, just kidding, I work at a hedge fund, right? Like, now I was going to be a peacemaker and now I'm just printing money instead, right? We got to make sure that the work is sustainable, that engagement is broad and open and long lasting, and that it is an environment in which we all can grow. Whether it's your career, you decide this is the profession you want to move into, or if you decide, I've actually always wanted to be an actuary, but I really believe in this work, right? There are lots of people who do this type of work on a volunteer basis, or even just inside the lens of how they do the rest of their work. One of the participants in my session yesterday was a city council member, right? What an amazing lens to bring to being a politician, right? I think we all benefit from having some of that as part of our approach. And with that, I was told to leave time for questions. Yes. Oh, they're going to get you a mic, and I'm going to have us wait. Yeah, thanks. Don't lose it, though. We've got a question in the front, Lizzie. Thank you so much. Right here.
Hi.
Hi.
So I think I'm just a little unclear on what mediation is in the context of how you're practicing it.
Well, in the shortest definition, mediation is the use of a third-party facilitator to support a conversation between two or more people, and that's like the simplest version of it. But that doesn't quite answer your question. So can you ask it in a new way, and we'll try again.
Sure. How do you practice? Well, I guess, can I add something to it?
Absolutely.
How do you practice mediation, and how do your identities impact, or how have you seen them impact how you mediate?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. So, right, how do I practice mediation now, and then how do my identities impact my mediation? And I'm going to tell you that I don't much, because I think I used it all up. So 10 years ago, I was my appetite to mediate cases I was ravenous. I was like, give me 6 cases a day. I couldn't wait to be in the room. And after becoming a mediator and then joining the organization that I worked at that provided mediation services, I was so thrilled to be in it and around it all the time. And I mediated hundreds of cases in a ton of different case types: civil cases, criminal, parents, neighbor dispute, landlord-tenant. And a few years ago, I was mediating a landlord-tenant case, and I thought, I don't care about either of these people. And I was like, uh-oh, I don't belong in this room, right? So in that moment, and then through work with mentors and my boss at the time, and really thinking about it, I realized I want to maintain these skills, but and I'm still a mediator because I have this training and I do this work sometimes, but not as frequently as I did once. But I realized that what I really wanted to do was make sure that I was making space for people who had that appetite I used to have to get to do the work, because that's who should be in the room. If I don't have the appetite, who cares that I'm good at it? That, right? For me, it was like, well, that's not worth it. I should be making more good mediators. So the way that those skills shows up for me now is coaching new mediators, is teaching law students about mediation, is sort of sharing its values places I go, and working with the National Association for Community Mediation to support new centers and growing centers. So, right, my identity is I'm a mediator, and now I think of myself as sort of like an advocate for mediation more than someone who really is excited to get in the room. So I train mediators a lot, and I coach coaches who train mediators. And for me, that's been a great way to like evolve where my interest and talent are while still in service to the work, and making sure that I'm bringing more and more people into the opportunities. Did that answer your question? Okay, great.
All right. I'm right here.
I can't find you.
Left,
Are you
front.
Oh, you're
Oh my gosh.
You were too close.
Yes, yes,
Sorry.
that's surprising. I'm kind of gonna invert his question. So, how do you feel your role as a mediator has impacted your identities and like your relationships in your own life and benefited or?
Yeah, this is a great question. And every time I'm interviewed, I get asked a version of that question, and I love it. So I am a mediator because I love conflict. And I, as a young girl in the 80s, was perceived as combative. And so I think that for people, adults who knew me as a child, they were not surprised I was going to go to law school, and they were surprised that I was going to be a mediator because of what those identities look like. And so, you know, becoming a mediator, at first when I was becoming a mediator, it made me really annoying to be around because I kept trying to use the skills all the time. And the example I lift up a lot is looking at my amazing roommate of 5 years and saying to her, "What is it about leaving dishes in the sink that's important to you?" Which is an unacceptable question to another person, right? And she said, "I don't know what this is, but I'm not doing it." And she left the kitchen, which was the right response, right? So when I first became a mediator, I mean, I think like any practice, right? You probably have this, if you're taking more than one class this semester, do you have that moment where you're like, this thing and this thing are the same thing? It's like it all starts to overlap, or you start to see it everywhere, right? You go through a breakup, every song's about you, right? It's like when I was learning to mediate, it was everywhere, and I was trying to do it with everyone all the time. And that didn't make me better at it, and it did make me hard to be around. But over time, once I was actually trained and certified in mediating cases, the way that it super influenced who I am and how I move through the world is it taught me to use silence. That is the skill as a mediator that changed my life. I'm a verbal processor. I would like to ask you a question, and then if you don't answer me immediately, I'm happy to explain why I asked the question and then give you a few options for answers, for reasons you might want to answer the question I just asked. That's not actually helpful, which I didn't know. I thought I was really helping people. But in mediation, in that facilitative model, you can't do that. You ask a question and you have to just deal with it. And I have learned over the years, especially with the people that are closest to me and with my students and with people I've worked with, that asking a question or making space and leaving silence for the other person it was a mediation skill that I think has made me a good friend and a good listener and really shapes how I show up. And mediation also taught me a lot of humility. The idea that my idea to solve someone else's problem is useless is like when I firmly believe that the people who are in the situation have the best answer for how to move forward. And my job is just to do this brief intervention and create an opportunity for them to do really important work and then like disappear into the night. And like really coming to believe that and practicing it has helped me in how I show up in all things. And this might also be a consequence of middle age, but like I also take less things personally, right? Less things are my responsibility. I trust other people more. So that's how it shaped me. Yeah.
A question over here.
Here, and then maybe over here.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
So I think you kind of answered a little bit of my question because I was thinking that mediation, learning how to do it goes beyond the education, but how do you train your mind in the real world? Like just train yourself to be able to get past your identity and like, do you have some suggestions? Silence sounds like one of them, but do you have other suggestions to help get your mind into that place or to be a better mediator?
Yeah. I think that for me, like all things, it's really helpful to know when it's not going to work for me. So, for example, right now I'm doing a project with my old roller derby league. That is obviously an identity I hold. I put the thing on the slide. I talked about it twice in an hour, right? But I know that the organization is completely different from when I played. I mean, literally, it was an LLC. Now it's a 501c3. It's a totally different type of business, right? So when I make space for them or when I'm training them or working with them, it's like I have to be really mindful not to overly rely on our shared identity towards a solution. So I think that's one way that shows up for me, where especially where we have a shared identity, I want to be careful that I don't rely on it for more than building rapport and try to use it to push someone towards a solution or to encourage a type of resolution. And in the same way where someone and I have really distinct identities, to not let that mean we can't possibly find common ground. So for me, the biggest part about that labor and the internal mental part is understanding my own identities and understanding my own responses when my identities get threatened. So I get cold and quiet. Lots of people get hot and loud. I get cold and quiet. So I know if I'm getting cold and quiet, one, I appear menacing and unwelcoming. And two, I know that something is happening for me. So having that awareness for myself can help me when I'm responding to a threat that may or may not be real, make sure that I don't overcompensate for myself, and then I'm able to still show up for people. Did I answer your question? Okay, fabulous. Over here, I think? Yeah.
Test.
It's on.
Cool. I'm curious if you know of any priming techniques either you use or that you know of to go into a hard conversation, either being a mediator or just someone trying to solve a conflict or a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were here earlier, they're all the things that were on Sarah's slide. And if you weren't here earlier, I'll tell you about them. But really what we're looking for is ways to sort of manage our parasympathetic systems and our stress responses before they take over and we can no longer show up as our best self and in the best way that we want to. And so some techniques that I really love, I studied yoga and pranayama, which is breath work, was literally life-changing for me as a mediator. So, and you don't have to study breath work to be great at it. You can set a timer for 60 seconds and breathe really slowly before you go into the room. I do that before I go into a Costco, and I find I get less overwhelmed, right? Like, just let your nervous system sort of calm down. It's super impactful. For me, I will say when I'm doing a lot of work, I know that the only way to the best version of myself is to maintain a mindfulness practice, right? So for some people that looks like meditation, for some people that looks like prayer, for some people that looks like having a really great morning routine, you know, I think, but having a part of my everyday, whether it's 3 minutes or an hour, that's like very intentional and very mindful, I have found that later, if I'm going into one of those circumstances, I've got sort of a grounding place to get back to. A few other techniques that can work really well is like what's called like walk with me, talk with me. So for some people, sitting down face to face and making eye contact and talking about something really hard is very challenging. We have this great thing in the Midwest where we like to stand next to each other, look into the middle distance, and have a whole conversation. One of the hardest conversations I ever had with my grandfather, we were rebuilding deer stands in the woods. And my mom and I do some of our best work when we're puzzling, right? So as much as it's valuable to like focus and actively listen, sometimes it can be also really productive to have some other thing that you're doing. It can kind of let us show up a little more vulnerably. There's a theory that's why sometimes we have amazing conversations in the car, right? Because we're next to each other. It's a very tight space, but we're not just staring at each other, wondering how the other person feels. And one other strategy that I would put on that list is to know when it's lost, know when to take a break, know when to back away, know when to come back another time. If you're not showing up the way that you want to, or if you think the other person isn't showing up the way that they could, there's no, like, pushing forward is very likely to do damage. And again, none of this work is one and done. This is life work. We'll carry this for a long time. So let's find a time to come back later. Yeah?
I have a question.
Great.
As someone who is typically conflict avoidant, do you have any advice to be more comfortable with conflict?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I want to name that being able to avoid conflict is a highly advanced skill when you use it strategically. I know this because I'm not good at that. I would like to have a really hard conversation about everything, which if everything is really important, nothing is, right? So knowing when to say, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this at all, or we're not going to do this now, is actually a really fantastic conflict engagement skill when employed strategically. And I think he's conflict avoidant definitely has a negative connotation in our culture. And I really want to remove that idea from how we're talking about it. So first I want to name it's a skill, but if it's your default and you use it even when you don't want to, I like to think of engaging in if we think of it less as like we're going into a conflict and we're going to fight, and more like, I actually don't even talk about conflict resolution in a lot of my practice. I talk about conflict engagement. I think if you're able to invite people into space with you with curiosity and candor, so you're saying maybe to someone like, I really value our friendship, and I'm having a hard time with your dishes in the sink, Renee, right? You can invite someone into a conversation with you. Even just the structure being collaborative can make that feel really different. And I think it's really natural to avoid it. I also get very nervous. I want every mediator always nervous before they go into a case. One of my goddaughters coined the phrase, she said when she was 3 that she was nerve-sided about something, where you're equal parts nervous and excited. And like, that's how I want every mediator to feel every time. Because you don't know those people, you don't know what's gonna happen. I worked with law student mediators for a long time who were like just ready to kick the door down and go in and mediate. And I was like, this energy is all wrong, right? So I think that having reservations about engaging in challenging dialogue, for me, shows that you have a reverence for it, that work deserves. And I would encourage you to recognize that for most of us, we are better after that really hard work. And so it's worth it, but that doesn't make it simple or easy. And I wish you bravery in your pursuits.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's been great to hear from you.
Thank
My
you.
question is, how do you feel like your JD has enhanced your mediation and peace building skills?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for that. So first of all, it opens the doors. So I went to law school knowing that I wanted to work in the field of dispute resolution. I did not realize how small that field was. And honestly, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I didn't do enough research. If I'd done a lot of research, I might have gotten an MSW or a master's in conflict resolution. But I got some good advice from an attorney who said, oh, if that's the kind of stuff you want to do, you should get a JD. It has served me in many ways. One of those ways is that a lot of people who are experiencing serious conflict go to court. And as a community mediator, there's sometimes some controversy around, like, if you have a court-based program, is that community work? Or is it community work if people sort of call you out of the blue and say, I want to mediate with my neighbor? And the agency I worked at, we did both of those things. But about 70 to 80% of our work was either because of a statute or because it was referred through some sort of court relation. My position on that is that there's nothing about accessing court that no longer makes you a member of community. So I think it's still community-based work. And until we revolutionize our systems and people know that they could go somewhere else, I think people are going to continue to just go to court. I also worked with a number of faith-based institutions because that's the other major place that people go. They go to court, they go to their local politician, and they go to their place of worship when they're having a conflict and they don't know what to do. But a lot of those places have those 3 places have completely different missions than our conflict resolution. So being a partner to them so that they could sort of refer cases and send people in our direction was really helpful. For a lot of my career, walking into a judge's chambers and handing them a business card with JD at the end of it, it legitimized me. They're wrong, but lawyers, we think we're better than everybody else, right? We're not right about that, but we think we're great. We work really hard to become lawyers. Once you're in, everybody's like, welcome to the club. And I encourage people from all types of backgrounds to go to law school because I think the profession needs you. And the more people with more different experiences and educations who decide to enter the legal field or get a JD and do something else with it, the better I think it is for the profession. So in that way, it served me because it opened doors in courthouses. When I was trying to put in mediation programs in the domestic violence courthouse, right? There were a lot of reservations to what that would look like. We didn't mediate domestic violence cases, but we were going to be in that building and they were very nervous about it. But when I had a meeting with the court personnel and they learned that I had been an intern in those courtrooms arguing orders of protection, they went, oh, well, you understand the law, this'll work. So understanding the law well has allowed me to support bringing in programs that divert. The other way is that I have a philosophy bachelor's and my JD taught me how to read critically. Like I thought I really knew how to read and then I got a JD. So that's the other way in which it really influenced my career is it helps me to really critically analyze things. And I think we're at time. So thank you all so much. I'll stick around between the next speaker, right? Brian's at 2:30. Okay, thank you so much.